Welcome back. The voice crack was so serious. Hold on. Spray some Chloraseptic.
I feel like a sausage.
Welcome to Baddies for the People. I'm Rachel Pearl Jacobs.
And I'm Cheyenne Hunt.
And we're your resident baddies.
Let's get into it.
We're back, baddies, with season 2.
Season 2 of Baddies for the People. We've missed you and we're ready to get into it.
Yes. So I'm sure you're all wondering, what's the tea with me?
Rachel, what's the tea with you?
My dating life is still tragic.
Were you trying on the break?
Yes. So I decided that I wasn't paying for Raya anymore because no one talks on Raya.
I think that's so weird. You
It's
said
definitely
that
like a status thing. People just go on
to say that they're on Raya.
Yeah, it's weird.
But when you're paying money for a dating site, it seems really strange to me to not at least try to use it.
It's like a quintessential LA
thing. Okay. So,
you know?
So where did you meet these guys?
Off of Tinder, and maybe that's the problem.
The first one that you went out with, we had some high hopes. We talked about it beforehand. He sounded promising.
For sure.
And then not so much.
I feel like, okay, so just a caveat for this conversation. The things that I discuss are not things that I necessarily immediately wrote them off for. It's just data points.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Also, I don't go on any second dates, so that's also probably a me problem. But anyway.
Yeah, that is a you problem for sure.
Well, do you hear the dates? Like, I don't know if it's that, like, I'm just being overly critical or, like, why would I go on a second date?
Okay, so tell us about the first date, because then maybe that will illuminate this conundrum.
Okay, so we met for sushi. He wore Toms and high socks, which, I mean, I explained to my great-grandmother as house shoes, and she proceeded to tell me that maybe I needed to just buy him some sneakers. Absolutely not.
I don't know if Toms are house shoes. People wear them outside.
Yeah, but they shouldn't.
Also, what year is it? Like 2011?
You
Who's
should
wearing
not
Toms?
wear Toms outside.
Plus, Toms plus socks is crazy.
Is it a New York guy thing? Like a New York hipster artsy guy thing?
No.
Oh, I tried.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was canceled.
The next one is my favorite, though.
So I went on a hike with this person. This person I also had really high hopes for because in their bio was like young, smart, rich. Right? That's what it said?
Yes.
And
it blew my mind that meant that you had high hopes. I thought that was such a red flag.
What do you mean? He wasn't even rich, bro. That was the worst part.
Of course he's not rich. Rich people don't put "I'm rich" in their bios. Of course he wasn't rich. My God.
I feel like that's not true. Like,
no.
All the Persians, no shade. Like, make it very clear that they're rich in their bio, okay?
So, they don't say "I'm rich," though.
Yeah, I know, but, like, basically they do.
Jesus Christ.
They basically do, bruh. Yeah, so it is what it is. He wore pastel sweatpants.
Pastel what color?
Yellow.
Okay.
And a blue and white button down, like the ones from like 7th grade Abercrombie, you know?
Yeah, that is a crazy combo.
For a hike.
So my thing is like the sweatpants could be excusable if we're doing like athletic wear.
Oh, I definitely did athletic wear. And I was like, what the I mean,
My thing is sweatpants plus a button-down shirt is a guarantee that man is at rock bottom. That is a rock bottom outfit. That's not something you wear when you're doing well.
I don't know. That person was actually like pretty intelligent. I could at least have a stimulating conversation with him.
So then why did you write him off?
Even in my astrology birth chart, it says that physical attraction is important to me. So.
Okay.
So that's why.
And this wasn't because of the outfit.
I mean,
it was part of it.
The outfit didn't help.
Got it.
But I don't think the outfit being better would have gotten him a second date.
I understand.
The bar's on the floor.
Yeah, I genuinely don't understand why this is how men are showing up to first dates.
Or I have terrible taste. But what I will say is during my time, like because I'm still on Clubhouse wreaking havoc, there was this whole conversation and they were talking about how men don't want women who have careers because they want women who are going to be available for them all the time to give them attention. And then I was having this conversation and I was talking and I was basically saying I want a partner who I can maintain my same lifestyle with, meaning we pay someone to cook and clean. And this guy was like, why would I have a maid if I have a girlfriend?
Oh, because you think women are labor.
What? Like,
yeah, that's...
Yeah, so men don't want you to have a career and make your own money because they need you to live off of basically what they decide to give you. Because it's not really your money. Like in our money situation, it's like his money.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, the bar is like genuinely on the floor. Like if you are capable of putting together a cohesive outfit and you're not like an active, patriarchal, insane ass.
Yeah, but also like you probably have to be at least an 8.5.
At least for Rachel.
And this is problematic too.
Okay, I'm ready.
I understand that I'm really short, and I learned about genetics in gene class in science, okay? I know how the Punnett square works. So
why the fuck are we talking about a Punnett square
because
right now?
I need to solve for my shortness in the genetic lineup for my kids.
What the eugenics is this right now?
This is why I only date tall guys.
This is insane. Okay. We've devolved.
No, we haven't, because it's still on my dating life and why it's unsuccessful. And it's because I like Kindles, but not really like as like pretty, more rugged.
Dude, the one guy that she sent me a screenshot of where she was like, this guy is so hot. He was literally giving a speech at the RNC. I'm not even joking. He looked like a cop. He's this tall ass white guy giving a speech at the RNC.
I'm screaming. Okay, so listen, one time I did date a Trumper. That was actually, oh my God, I never told you this story.
No!
Because I thought, I don't know what I thought. But it was before Trump times.
You saved this for season 2? This is crazy.
Guys, I'm so problematic. Wait, where was I?
You dated a
no.
Trumper.
I need to rewind past that because I definitely never sent you a man at the RNC. I also am an equal opportunity lender. I also find other races of people attractive.
Wait,
and I don't even remember.
Was literally at a Republican convention.
He was absolutely not.
There was a elephant graphic in the background.
But I have always been partial to like those Alabama boys. It's because of my summers at Christian camp in Tennessee.
It's like a trauma bond. Okay. I understand now.
I'm hearing that Shane Gillis is on the table.
Yeah, Shane Gillis, apparently.
No, it would definitely be like more Madison Cawthorn, like pre.
Don't stop.
Yeah, but that's really problematic too.
What? Pre-disgrace from Congress? Yeah.
Sure, let's go with that. You can't be in a wheelchair and be a white supremacist, because I would consider dating someone in a wheelchair, but like, I couldn't date a white supremacist. Actually, there's like weird porn about that. Throwback to last season. Porn!
About
we didn't even
what?
Get, like white supremacists, like people do like slave play and like race play, and it's a whole thing.
Okay, that's enough of your tea. You've scalded me with your tea, and now it's time for my tea. I'm transitioning to myself right now. Okay, so the tea with me this week is, when you've been trying to get someone on something or get them to like something for literally years, and then all it takes is for someone else to point them in that direction. They finally do it, and you're like super annoyed. That is what has happened to me with my mom and politics and political theory. My mom is suddenly like the wokest baddie. It is so weird. It took years. I have been trying for years. I have a political science degree. I was that kid that was super annoying coming home from college being like, Mom, like, you don't get it. We're in late stage capitalism and we need to figure out how to revolt against the bourgeoisie. And my mom could not care less, was like, whatever, you'll grow up, you'll get a job, you'll see. My mom now is the one calling me being like, we are boycotting Target. Like, we are reclaiming our power as consumers. Like, we are not doing this. She's calling me, telling me about everything Elon Musk does, telling me everything that Jeff Bezos does. All of a sudden, she is like super woke, and she's showing up to protests, like ones that I don't even know about. And all it took, I don't know where, if it's like friggin' Rachel Maddow or whatever she is seeing on social media, I'm relieved, but it's also hysterical and frustrating. I'm like, lady, every time I said this for years, you looked at me like I was insane. And now you're like telling me all of these things, like you're trying to educate me about the concept of a boycott as if I don't know, as if I haven't been on and trying to get you on it.
Yeah, dude, Donald Trump has not been president. Like, this radicalization, at least where my mom started, when
Your mom too?
Yeah, when Trump started running for and became president, all of the conservatives are like, Trump derangement syndrome, blah, 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 blah. But like, in reality, if you're not completely horrified by what's happening and by what he's doing, then you have completely withered away into your alternative reality, head buried in the sand, like, just can't take it, which I totally get, whatever, do you. But yeah, no, this isn't like if someone else said it. This is like, we are deporting people who we consider with no proof to be gang members to El Salvador, to a prison that has no lists, like, no contact.
Yeah.
I don't know. How do we know it's not like actually just a concentration camp?
We don't know that. I mean, it's also, it depends on your definition of concentration camp. The United Nations and the International Court of Justice have all condemned this place, along with the other places that Trump has been sending detainees, as not meeting basic standards of humanitarian law. So it very well may be.
Yes. And like, I know that we have Guantanamo Bay, but I always want to remind people that the United States is still uppity as hell.
Did you see that they sent all the people back from Guantanamo? Not because they realized the error of their ways, because they figured out that it was expensive as to ship detainees across the ocean into Guantanamo Bay and hold them there and have that area staffed.
Where is Guantanamo Bay again? Cuba?
Cuba.
I mean, it's not that far away, but like,
it's still incredibly expensive. And for what? That's the thing that cracks me up. It's like Doge, efficiency, saving money. You guys are spending so much money on like literal nonsense.
You know, Doge like uses AI to like select what money is wasteful.
I'm not shocked.
That's insane to me.
Yeah, the technology is not there yet, so they're making tons of mistakes. And
but like,
and bringing it all back to my tea, by the way, these are all things that my non-college educated mother has like talked to me about unprompted. It used to be like if something was political and was happening, like I had to broach it with her, and like it does at least make me hopeful that like that generation of people is getting more engaged in a way that could contribute to like more change.
My mom used to be a Republican.
Oh, really?
Bruh.
That makes like so much more sense. Just like, knowing how you were raised.
Bruh. Yes, all the shade. All the shade, mother.
I know you watch this. Sorry, Rachel's mom.
Like, bruh.
My bad. Didn't mean to broach that one.
How can we like... What are we doing? Anyway.
Hey, we live and we learn. We reform. And that's what they're doing. That's my tea, is look at them living and learning. And hopefully that is happening on a broader scale and it will contribute to change.
But actually it's not, because we were paying for the people that were being shipped to Guantanamo Bay, the US government. Whereas like Trump signed, like it's like a $6 million contract, I think, for a year. Y'all. Literally,
for them to go to the prison in El Salvador?
In El Salvador. Literally, we spend $1 million per child that is in juvenile hall in Los Angeles County.
Yeah, and it's $6 million for a full year.
For a full year.
How
for
many?
How many people?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That's how you know literally we're just death camping them respectfully. Yeah. Or not respectfully. I don't even know. Like,
disrespectfully.
But like, I don't want them, like the individual who's like, I'm not trying to disrespect the person who's in that situation. It's just the people that are doing it. Okay.
So that was the tea. And with that, Rachel, what made you cringe this week?
Well, speaking of El Salvador, Pam Bondi said that people who are vandalizing Teslas are domestic terrorists and Trump is threatening to send them to prison in El Salvador with the gang members.
Wait, I actually didn't see this. I knew that the Trump administration was trying to liken vandalism against Teslas to domestic terrorism. Since when are they sending these people to El Salvador?
I don't know, because the thing is, vandalism doesn't strip you of your
rights.
Yeah, especially if you're a citizen. So, like,
it seems like it's not funny. It seems so basic, but the fact that we have to say that is insane.
You know, it would be actually really interesting if this is really morbid and horrible, but I wonder if there's an argument to make about stripping people of their citizenship if they commit a crime and how that could be used to deport them.
I'm sure they're trying to do that. They're also trying to just be able to deport people who have green cards or have become citizens that have never committed a crime.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like more in like an abstract legal theory, like because of the 13th Amendment and like that you are able to be enslaved through it. Like technically an enslaved person is not a citizen. So could that be used as a loophole to deport American citizens if they're convicted of crime?
I feel like you need to de-lawyer that for the listener right now, because I followed that, but it took me some effort. So let's take like 2 steps back. The 13th Amendment does what?
So the 13th Amendment allows you to be enslaved if you're convicted of committing a crime. So it says that, at least the first clause. Because of that, there's an argument that if you're enslaved, then you're not a citizen. And by not being a citizen of the United States and being incarcerated, you could make the argument then
that you could be deported.
Well, yes, but also that you would not necessarily have to be afforded due process.
That's scary.
Yeah, so
I'm sure they're thinking about it.
Speaking of Trump and Elon Musk, Trump funded by Elon Musk equals Hitler. Remember that equation.
Yeah, it's hard to forget. And Tesla in general is just really going through it right now. Not only are people vandalizing the cars, their CEO has completely vandalized their stock value. That was funny. I'm proud of it. Laugh.
By being a Nazi, you just missed the punchline.
No, actually, though, it is crazy. I listened to this economist that I love talking about this concept that this was such a business miscalculation for Elon Musk. When you look at a brand like Nike and you look at their decision to get deeply involved politically, they did the math. They looked at their customer base, their consumer base, and they realized that going political would serve to basically further entrench them in the hearts and minds of those consumers. They would lose very little as a result. These people were already buying their products and they were doubling down. Elon did the exact opposite thing. He looked at the politics of his base. When you look at Republicans, studies show that something like 60 to 80% of them say they will never, ever buy an electric vehicle.
AKA they're poor.
No, or they just don't have climate conscience.
I'm sorry, but like, aren't Republicans disproportionately poor?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and they live in poor states. So because they're poor...
I don't think that's why.
I do.
I think it's because they don't believe in climate science. But anyway, when you look at this bet that he made, it's absolutely delulu. Like, his entire consumer base is generally leftist leaning, people who are concerned about the climate, people who can afford to buy these cars. And he just flipped them all off politically. Absolutely. And so why, in God's name, would it make sense for him to do this as a business decision unless the ultimate goal is to understand that he's going to lose some stock value, but to so deeply upend the regulatory powers of the government that all of the investigations that he's been put under by the different administrative agencies can go away and he can entrench himself in some kind of permanent role of power that even money couldn't buy or stock value couldn't buy. It feels like he's made a really nefarious calculation that we should all be deeply disturbed by.
It's the calculation he's always made. White man plus power equals apartheid. Okay? And it's what his dad chose, and clearly he has followed in his lead.
That ties in really well with my cringe because I'm also talking about both law and order and El Salvador and prisons in El Salvador. This week, we're talking about the fact that the quote unquote law and order party apparently doesn't like the courts, the mechanism of enforcing the law.
Or democracy.
Yeah, also that. We are in the midst of, everybody's been saying this phrase, but I'm actually going to use it in a way that I think really applies, a constitutional crisis. And here's why. Essentially, right now, we are at a crossroads between the power of the president and the supposedly co-equal branches of government. In this particular case, we're talking about the courts. So here's what happened, and here's why it matters. On March 17th, a Trump Justice Department attorney refused to answer questions from a U.S. District Court judge. I know that was a lot of legal jargon, so I'm going to break down for you why that is basically the start of a constitutional crisis. Essentially, U.S. District Court Judge James Boasberg issued an order demanding that the administration explain why they essentially flouted his previous order and deported a huge plane full of people to a prison in El Salvador. The court order in question here was a temporary restraining order that this judge put in place that was meant to stop the deportation of a group of people that were alleged to be Venezuelan gang members. This was on March 15th. The Trump administration ignored this order and deported them anyway, leading to this standoff in the courts on March 17th. So let's take a big step back and look at how we got here and the details of this case. So remember, on Trump's very first day in office, he signed a bunch of executive orders. One of them designated a bunch of South American gangs as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, he used the authority under this order to then deport this large group of people he was claiming were part of a gang called Tren de Agua.
Okay, so there's a couple things here. We have to even take a bigger step backwards because remember, he's deporting them through the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. Let's go back to constitutional law. In the Fifth Amendment, there's a carve out that allows the United States to deport foreign agents without due process. Now, what are foreign agents? Foreign agents are terrorists and people who can be considered as working for a country who we are at wars with, government. Okay? So now, why does that matter? What Cheyenne said earlier about how they designated certain groups as
terrorist organizations.
Exactly.
Yeah. So specifically, the Trump administration targeted a number of South American gangs. And if you remember in our last episode, we talked about how this would be used as a power grab to be able to deport people, that they could try to make any connection between this person and a South American gang. And that's not a coincidence because we know the Trump administration is coming after the Latino community. Well, we called it, and it has now come to pass. In this case, there were a number of issues in this lawsuit wherein the authority of the administration was called into question, specifically the way in which they decided who these people were that they were deporting and whether or not they were gang members. Super questionable. Some of it comes down to whether or not they were from Venezuela and had tattoos, which is absolutely insane. Like that does not pass constitutional muster, period. It's obvious. And Judge Boasberg in the district court just immediately recognizes how this is super problematic. So he issues two orders. One is an oral order to the Trump administration saying, if these planes are in the air right now, you need to turn them around. You have not provided sufficient evidence for these deportations. About an hour later, he issues a written order saying something similar. Essentially, these deportations do not pass constitutional muster. You have not met the burden of proof, and there is a problem here. Now, Pam Bondi made a few different arguments. And anyone who works in the legal community is going to just die. She said that the oral order didn't have the same kind of legal authority, and so they didn't have to follow it. They did not have to follow what this judge said because it was an oral order. So that's why they didn't turn the planes around. The second thing that she said was that they didn't have to listen to this order because the planes were already over international waters. And so international maritime law applied, and the judge did not have jurisdiction over that plane anymore, which is beyond insane because he does have authority over the Trump administration, which can get on the phone and make the call and have the plane turned around. They do have authority over the people on that plane and that plane that's doing United States government business. The whole thing is absolutely delusional.
Okay,
and so I don't want to give these arguments like any credit because they are insane.
Yes, but there's like a bigger piece to this, and that's that when the judge asked for more information about these Venezuelan nationals and the individuals who were deported, the Justice Department came back and said they couldn't disclose more information in open court because it was a threat to the United States national security.
Yeah, which the judge rightfully said was not correct, not how the law works, insufficient, that they needed to provide more information. And obviously we've seen, if you have been online at all of MAGA world calling for Judge Boasberg to be impeached because he's not qualified.
If they're not calling for his death, that is.
Yeah, which is insane because he literally might be the most qualified judge in the country to hear this specific case.
Yeah, so an interesting thing about Judge Boasberg, one, is that he was appointed by George Bush, who is a Republican.
Yes.
Two, he actually served on the FISA courts, which are the courts that specifically vet and handle information that is of national security importance to make sure that it is kept in secret so that it's not out in open court in the way that, certain other information is, because part of, having our government is that it's supposed to be transparent.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to know the things that occur in these court cases.
He would 100% be the guy that would know whether or not something is fit for open court or not.
But also, he's the chief judge of the DC circuit courts. Okay? Like, this is not your Joe Schmo.
Yeah.
This is not your Trump appointed, unqualified, been out of law school for 3 years, never really practiced law, appointed judges.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that he was pretty accommodating with the administration after the first hearing. He told them that they needed to provide him more information in a sealed writing. And so if there were supposedly any risks in there, they wouldn't be in the public record anyway.
Yeah, he gave them multiple chances to offer more information in sealed writings that would not be public. And time again, since this first issue on the 17th, the administration has refused to provide any useful or meaningful clarification on how they determine that these people fit the qualifications for deportation. It seems as if they are essentially giving the judiciary branch a middle finger. And I don't say that lightly. It feels as if the entire purpose of this case is like a toddler trying to push the boundaries and figure out exactly how much they can get away with, because this is pretty unprecedented. And we can take a brief trip through history to talk about why this matters so much. And anyone who has ever studied government, political science, the courts, the legal system can tell you how scary this is, because we have in this country, or at least we are supposed to have, 3 co-equal branches of government. We have the executive branch, which is the president and all of the agencies. We have Congress, which is the House and the Senate. And we have the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court and all of the other courts that fall underneath it. They are supposed to be co-equal branches. Now, when you have an executive branch that is trying to say that anything that the judiciary branch does to stop the agenda of the president is unconstitutional, you have a constitutional crisis. When you have an executive branch that is unwilling to comply with even the most basic requests for information from a judge, this is intentional. They are intentionally trying to threaten the legitimacy of the courts and their authority over their actions. And this has happened before. Let's look back to Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears. And again, the court's response to that was virtually nothing, because the relationship between the executive branch and the courts is not much more than a pinky promise to recognize each other's authority, and specifically the authority of the courts. It issues orders. It does not really have a mechanism within itself to enforce the law. That has always been within the authority, essentially, of the executive branch. And when you don't have an executive that understands the importance of a constitutional three-pronged government, we end up in a situation where the legitimacy of the courts and their ability to stop the president and uphold the law is reduced down to a big question mark. And so I'm cringing right now, because what I think is happening is, like I said before, I think the Trump administration is behaving like a toddler, and they are coming in to this second term with like a wrecking ball, trying to push the boundaries and break the rules as far as they can so they can get away with as much as they can. And we're really staring down the barrel of this constitutional crisis right now. Judge Boasberg has said that if they do not, this is their last chance, and if they do not submit useful information in their next filing, they are looking at contempt of court. And that is pretty unprecedented. The federal judiciary holding the executive branch in contempt, and then what? Who enforces whatever the contempt order is? What I'm
no one.
Yeah, it's very, very scary, and I'm cringing.
I'm cringing that he's threatening contempt of court like anyone cares.
Yeah, well, what else is he going to do? That's what the judiciary has. That's their tool.
Yeah. I feel like this is very on brand for the Trump administration. They've been around, and it just so happens that the American people are about to find out exactly how our government works.
Yeah. And to bring it full circle, I'm cringing because this is supposed to be the quote unquote law and order party. That's their whole thing, is that we need to return to a system of justice and law and order. Where do you think that exists without the authority of the judiciary branch? And when you call for a judge to be impeached, and you know also that means he's going to get threats on his life, and you're going to sick your supporters on him, who we know are capable of violent coups, when you attack the judiciary branch every time they do something that you don't like, how does that equate to law and order? It's just the law and order that you like, that you choose, that you control. It's absolutely delusional.
Honestly, I don't know what people expected, especially after the Supreme Court ruled that pretty much everything that has to do with presidential power is
immune from the law.
Exactly. Like, here we are.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. What are they going to, he's not going to face criminal punishment.
It's a shame they missed.
Oh. And with that, it's time for the vibes. Rachel, what are you vibing on this week?
Well, I'm not vibing on the internet still being trash, and thinking now that somehow the fact that there's laws that were enacted in California to protect individuals who speak out or file a lawsuit about sexual harassment from being sued for speaking out about their sexual harassment, and the internet is still somehow blaming the fact that Justin Baldoni sexually harassed Blake Lively on Blake Lively. Like,
it goes on. The saga continues.
So California recently enacted Civil Code Section 47.1, which bars retaliatory lawsuits on public disclosures of sexual harassment and related allegations.
So
including disclosures to the press.
In non-legalese, what does that mean?
You cannot sue someone because they exposed you for being a sexual harasser.
Right. And so Blake Lively filed a motion to dismiss Justin Baldoni's case under that law, correct?
Yes, because he is now suing her for defamation. The thing is, this has just been a terrible calculation on his part all the way through. And it's shown me how out of touch and struggling at reading the greater population of the United States truly is. Because if the internet is any representation,
it's not just struggling at reading. It's, again, I say this every time we talk about this. It's like basic information literacy. The number of people who fall for the bots that we know that he purchased that are out there just disseminating the same weird talking points. Like, all the evidence is there. You can read these text messages.
Wait, I have one better.
Okay, I'm ready.
This is actually just showing us how much America hates women.
Yeah, also that. They'll literally take any excuse, like any excuse at all, to hate on women.
It's interesting how Ryan Reynolds has kind of been like hooked in like as Blake Lively's partner, like in a way that they are shaming him, in which I've never really seen a man come under fire before.
Because he doesn't have control of his woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's 100% that. It's like, control your woman. This is embarrassing for you. And as a man, you should be ashamed.
But that's not really even what they're saying. They're saying like, you are hypnotized, like your woman controls you.
Well, right. And I think the undertone of that is you should be the one in the driver's seat, and she's a woman, so you should be controlling this, and she needs to shut her mouth and sit down. She's making a lot of noise.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really gross. And I definitely thought we were past this. It bums me out because it's like, was Me Too like a real movement, or was it just a moment? And now it's over. Like, this law was enacted in that moment, and people were really excited about it because it made sense. Like, you should not be afraid of suing your employer or suing somebody because they've sexually harassed you, because they might sue you for defamation. You should not be afraid of that. And yet, like, now the response to this law is like, this is an insane lib California thing to do. And oh my God, this is so unfair to men. Like, this is insane.
Yeah, but movements become moments when they lose momentum. When you have something like Me Too, which was literally having your foot on their neck, in the same way that Black Lives Matter was doing that, as soon as you ease up, just know that Target is going to roll back all of its DEI policies, okay? So to have this whole even cringe vibe come full circle with everything that we've been talking about, from the tea to the cringe to the vibes, like, never shop at Target again.
Facts.
Like your mom said, okay? This boycott is never ending.
Yeah, because at this point, even if they do change that policy, that's just corporate capitalist strategy. Like, it's not a realignment of values.
Right, because when people show you who they are, we have to believe them.
They mean it.
And I think that that's how we ended up in the situation we're in right now, though, with Trump. Yeah. He has shown us who he is. Elon Musk has told us that we give people way too much leeway to rebrand. No,
Donald Trump won this election because he rebranded as like a populist for the working class. All they talked about was working class stuff, like the price of gas and the price of eggs and healthcare. And he showed us in his first term, he didn't give a about any of that. We give people way too much leeway to rebrand. Stop it. Enough. Remember who people are.
Elon Musk is pro-apartheid. He literally did a Nazi salute that he wants to call an involuntary boner. Remember? That was a couple episodes ago. We really need to pause and take this moment in holistically, okay?
Yeah.
Because what is so frustrating to me is that this moment of white supremacy is the movement. And if we aren't careful, we will have something that should be on its dying breaths
get momentum and run us over.
Yes.
That's what it feels like right now, for sure. 100%.
So, Cheyenne, tell me about your vibes for the week.
My vibes this week are that a company called Niantic, which is famous for producing Pokemon Go, was just purchased by a Saudi Arabian company. This is interesting because, not unlike China, which we've talked a lot about in regards to their ownership of TikTok, Saudi Arabia is a company where if a company is Saudi Arabia owned, it means their government has their fingerprints all up in it. Buying Pokemon Go is no small thing. Do you remember during the pandemic and in the times afterward, everybody walking around with their cell phones, searching in people's backyards and trespassing, looking for Pokemon? Well, that app collected a ton of location data on you, on your friends, on your kids, on your phone, and not just while you were using it, but virtually all the time. And now the Saudi Arabian government has all of that information. That is a profound amount of data. And if you think that that doesn't matter, this is data that could identify the fact that you're somebody who goes to a Planned Parenthood, that they know where you work. They know who you associate with. If you go to LGBTQ bars or affiliated spaces, this is a lot of intimate data for a foreign government to be able to have on you. So I don't know. I mean, I think that one, we should all be thinking more intently about the apps that we use and whether or not it's really worth it to give intimate data just to play a game on our phone. And also, we should have a government that prevents acquisitions like this and is actively involved in the what I would see as a safety threat, not only to individual citizens, but also this feels like a national security issue to be able to have that much intimate information on the people of your country. Like, the United States government should be involved in preventing some of this. And it is, once again, just goes to show that if you're rich, you're in a different echelon of power. It doesn't matter if you're from the US or anywhere else around the world. There is a whole club where they get to do whatever they want, and the rest of us are just up for sale.
I don't care. Apple already has a microchip in your butthole and knows everything about you, from when you open your eyes in the morning to when you take your morning dump. Like, respectfully, the Saudis are not going to do anything worse to us than what our government isn't planning to do to us. I would be more concerned if the state of Texas purchased that company than I am that Saudi Arabia did. I mean,
I wouldn't be surprised, though, if the state of Texas is able to buy that information from Saudi Arabia because they want to look for data on women who have gone to Planned Parenthood.
But they could always do that.
Yeah, that's true. And they do that, by the way. Not the state of Texas, but after Texas passed that bill where you can sue people who aid and abet abortion after their ban, and you can get up to $10,000. That's like a whole industry now where people go around and try to buy data to investigate abortions and be able to bring lawsuits. So we've created a whole vigilante class of people that use our data against us that way.
Do you think that Saudi Arabia found Jamal Khashoggi because he was playing Pokemon Go?
I have a really hard time believing that Jamal Khashoggi had any interest in Pokemon Go. But you know what? Sometimes people have crazy hobbies. And
I have a different take.
If that's why he ended up mincemeat in a suitcase, that's awful. And it's totally possible.
Dude, if there's one thing I know about Saudi princes, well, there's a couple things I know. One, they like to hire girls off the internet to come over for like $50,000 so they can shit on their chest.
What?
Two, that they have a lot of money. And three, that they have a lot of wives. But all of that being said, Trump gave them that information because he needed money. I'm 100% confident about that.
Speaking of Saudi princes, that made me think of, like, you know what I've always wondered about? Do you remember that period of time when Rihanna was dating a Saudi prince?
I do not.
Oh, that was like a whole thing. And I am so curious about that dynamic, because I cannot imagine a universe where Rihanna is like kowtowing to any man. I just can't imagine how that worked. And I don't think it was a particularly long relationship, which makes sense. But imagining a Saudi prince trying to tame Rihanna is really just, it's like a feminist wet dream for me, because I imagine that she stepped on his neck in the best way before she walked away. That woman cannot be bought.
He's kind of hot.
Oh, you found him?
Of course I did.
Let me see.
But I don't think that he's necessarily a prince.
Let me
He's
see
closer
him.
to like a duke.
I don't care. You said he's hot. Oh, low-key, he is kind of hot. That's crazy.
And that further proves that I'm not just, it's all conservatives.
What?
Black, white, or Middle Eastern that I'm attracted to. God bless.
Okay. Well, that was the vibes. And now it's time for the deep dive. So buckle up. On this week's deep dive, we're going to address some of the big news that occurred while we were on our break here between season 1 and 2. If you've seen any of the reporting on approval ratings of the president or both parties, one of the things that's really notable is that the Democratic Party has some of the lowest approval ratings it has ever had in American history. That may be shocking, given that Trump is also struggling. You would think the Republicans and Trump may be struggling more so than the Democrats as the opposition party to this crazy regime. And yet, maybe it's because there's not all that much opposition going on. We're going to talk a little bit about this power struggle, why it is that people are so dissatisfied with the Democrats, basically from every angle of the party, whether it's leftists to moderates, and what we think we should do about it. So today we're going to talk about the concept of civility politics.
Some of you may think that I have Trump derangement syndrome because a lot of this I attribute to Trump. On March 4th, President Trump addressed a joint session of Congress, but it's actually not a State of the Union because it's the first one and he's only 60 days in. He did what he usually does, which is make a threat about annexing or taking over some territory. This time it was Greenland, not Canada. Thanking Doge and Elon Musk for funding his dictatorship. Promoting tariffs, which
has absolutely tanked our economy
oh my God,
already.
it just created like so much beef with our allies.
Yeah.
And stop talking about how much maple syrup costs. You should have gone to Costco when you saw this coming and gotten a large container like I did.
Facts.
We've been talking about his insane immigration policies, whether that's trying to withdraw birthright citizenship or deporting people without due process. He blamed Biden for the price of eggs. Big cock is to blame for that.
She means big chicken farming industry.
And he asked Congress to pass tax cuts for his rich buddies. The Democratic Party, being the weak, bent-over cucks that they are, wore pink blazers, which I wear every day, not as an act of protest, but as an act of greatness.
Okay.
And had bingo paddles that they used to object. And then when Al Green had a moment of courage to speak out against Donald Trump, what did they do? They censured him.
10 Democrats voted with Republicans to censure their colleague that had enough of a spine to actually stand up and say something.
Now, some of you might be curious, what do you mean Congress censured him? It's basically when a Congress person puts a spray bottle and sprays it on the other person, the other congressperson. It's absolutely no meaning.
Yeah, it's not. It's symbolic. It has no meaningful repercussions on that member. However, it is symbolic. And so in that sense, it's
virtue signaling.
Yeah, well, why are 10 Democrats virtue signaling against the only one that had a spine?
Because they're cucks. Okay? Oh, speaking of cucks, Cuck Schumer then whipped, which is still like such a problematic way to say, like he tried to rally people to vote in a certain way.
That's not why they say whipped. It's not about rallying in like a motivating way. It's whipped, like get in line and vote your party line. It's supposed to be like authoritarian. That's why they call the position a whip, because you're like getting them in line. That's why it's like a job for a hard
slavery. Okay. It's giving slavery. Okay. That's all I'm going to say. It does. So Cuck Schumer did his slavery thing and whipped votes so that the Republican spending bill would be passed, and funding their agenda.
And we got nothing in return. That's the thing that most people are upset about. Was there was an attempt to negotiate and to have something that would be bipartisan. Republicans pulled out of that negotiation and then essentially held a government shutdown over Chuck Schumer's head. He could have used our one piece of leverage to actually force them to come back to the negotiating table, but instead he handed them a free ticket to pass their agenda unchallenged.
You know what Chuck Schumer did? Actually, he became Cuck Schumer, because what we watched was literally Cuck Schumer and the most important thing to him in the entire world, America, watched America get by Donald Trump and his agenda. Straight up. And what are we going to do about it? Oh, nothing. We're just going to take that.
Well, you know, he needed to avoid that government shutdown so he could go on his book tour.
About anti-Semitism.
On the left. Anti-Semitism on the left, while Elon Musk is doing Nazi salutes.
Not only do we have Cuck Schumer, but the Democratic Party at large is swinging with the right, okay?
Okay.
We are literally fornicating the enemy with our agenda. We saw it with Gavin Newsom when he was like, I don't support the 12 out of 50 million trans girl athletes being in sports.
And my good buddy, Steve Bannon. Yeah, that was rough.
But who was it that he did an interview with Charlie Kirk, y'all?
That's exactly what we're talking about here today. The whole exercise of Gavin Newsom's new podcast is a weird circle jerk of civility politics, or the illusion thereof, that we need to be able to reach across the table and find mutual connection. But that just validates the position that actual right-wing nut jobs are bringing to the table. But this is exactly what we're talking about.
So the Democrats aren't swinging, they're getting just so we all clear, right?
But they're doing it intentionally.
Yeah, that's why they're getting
Yeah.
They're bending over to get cheek spread. Bruh, like for real.
Well, now I think it's time we actually define civility politics and we talk about it, because we're just throwing it around. We've really put the cart before the horse here, Rachel. So let's jump in. Civility is really a popular talking point for Democrats who are trying to paint this picture that sometime in the recent past, there was a different way in which politics operated, and that people were civil to each other and proper and prim, and that was somehow recently lost. One example of modern Democrats clinging to this idea of civility politics is Joe Biden in 2019, fondly remembering conversations and dynamics he used to have with literal segregationists. He said, quote, "At least there was some civility. We got things done. We didn't agree on much of anything. We got things done. We got it finished. But today you look at the other side and you're the enemy, not the opposition, the enemy. We don't talk to each other anymore."
All because not all white people realize they're racist. This is a waste of time.
In 2024, Obama proclaimed his support for Kamala Harris because she was, quote, the least divisive of the candidates. And this, again, is something where we're seeing a pull to civility. We're more interested in what's less disturbing, less divisive to the status quo than what's actually effective.
When they go low, we go high is a reference to hitting someone in the balls. Did you know that? Because it's below the belt.
I guess it is, actually. It would
That's
be like
literally what the reference is. So
it would be like a boxing thing, right?
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, resident man. Michelle Obama, obviously, when they go low, we go high. A very famous Democratic call for civility, which moderates around the country really rallied behind. And what I think is interesting is has now become widely chastised, at least among leftist circles.
It's because, once again, it is misogynist. This is a clear reference to hitting someone in the balls.
I don't think it's misogynistic.
It is outrageous that this is the only type of example that we have.
This is
when
the kind
they go low, we go high. Absolutely not.
Don't punch me in the tit.
I will cut off your ankles, bro.
Don't. This is why people don't want to hang out around leftists. What do you mean Michelle Obama is a misogynist? This is unbearable, Rachel.
Okay, well, that was not a good one, but sometimes they're better.
Okay, well, each of these...
That's cut.
No, it's staying in.
No!
This requires advocates for civility to hearken back to some romanticized past that genuinely does not exist, at least not for people who weren't part of the political status quo. Let's be brutally honest. What speech and activity is determined to be civil is entirely determined by the race and class of the people who said it.
You might have an idea of what civility is. Polite conversations, treating others with respect, disagreeing without harsh words or feelings. But that's just a vibe. It doesn't actually tell us anything about what civility politics and civility truly are. Like many other social constructions, civility doesn't have an easy to pin down definition. In the words of political philosopher Christopher Zern, civility is an ambiguous virtue relying on contingent social conventions to effect its moral work. Conventions that may themselves be morally suspect. It can be hard to define, and in more particular, hard to specify its precise requirements at any one time. More worrisomely, it is subject to strategic manipulation, frequently instrumentalized as the pursuit of political power. I have no idea what I just said, bro. I know you don't either. Because what? Basically, civility is a set of moving goalposts based on what, in this country, white people like. And by white people, I mean social standards and values. So maybe white religious fanatics is a better way to describe it.
Well, you're forgetting the other crucial part of this.
Homosexual?
What? No. With money.
No,
The
but
elites. It's always the elites, too.
yeah, but the thing is, I feel like the backwater Baptists are really poor.
Yeah, not their leaders.
Yeah, I know, but the backbone of it is the poor ones.
The backbone of it is the guy collecting everything in the
You're
plate.
right. You're right. Okay. Basically, civility is a set of moving goalposts based on things like social standards and values. The last sentence of the quote is really important, though.
Which you definitely didn't process because the accent was thick.
More worrisomely, it is subject to strategic manipulation, frequently instrumentalized to the pursuit of political power. Meaning, people make up whatever works for them at that given moment, and that's what they run with.
That becomes the rules for society.
Which is how we ended up with societal standards set by the founder and president of Liberty University, Jerry Falwell Sr. Yikes. Like every other example on this podcast, I'm connecting it to slavery because we are down bad, America. John C. Calhoun, who spoke to the Senate floor in 1837 to defend the institution of slavery,
Cringe.
said, however sound the great body of the non-slave-holding states are at present, in the course of a few years, they will be succeeded by those who will have been taught to hate the people and institutions of nearly one half of this union, with a hatred more deadly than one hostile nation ever entertained towards another.
As funny as that accent was, if you actually think about what he's saying that attacking half the union over the practice of slavery is uncivil.
Yeah, actually, he's saying that the rhetoric that these people are using is more deadly than the institution of slavery itself.
Yeah. And I know that you're like, wow, that's a relic of a different time. But as we go through this deep dive, it's going to become abundantly clear that it is not.
Because as I've said before on this podcast and was edited out, and I will say again, all these white people are white supremacists and fascists and want an authoritarian government and secretly have clan hoods. The end.
Well, I don't know who these is.
What?
All these white people.
Yeah, these white people. This was in response to a petition. Just like when I wrote a petition in 3rd grade that we didn't have to play this game called British Bulldogs anymore.
What?
Yeah, I wrote a petition
so
in 3rd grade
specific.
because I wanted to protest something.
What is this game?
You had to like pick each other up, and I was like the smallest kid, of course, and like it was just really dangerous.
Wow. You were like 3rd grade OSHA. I have rights.
But really, I was like, I can't pick up these fat motherfuckers, and I don't want to lose.
Okay. Anyway, civility was also used against the civil rights movement. What a transition. And we're going to keep going. Today we view it this way because we're taught that the civil rights movement was comprised entirely of nonviolent, very peaceful activists who resisted with calm conversation and solely by playing by the rules established by those in power. The truth is, this is a farce, and there are numerous examples of places where this history was egregiously whitewashed. One of my favorites is the history of Rosa Parks, and I talk about this all the time because I know I was not the only one who is taught in school that she was a frail old woman and that her taking the seat on the bus and refusing to give it up was not some kind of act of protest, that she was tired. And this whole thing that then led into the bus boycott happened as a result, somewhat accidentally.
So basically what Cheyenne is saying is that Rosa, too, was a baddie for the people.
Rosa was
and
absolutely
y'all
a
tried
baddie
to
for the people.
mammify her.
She was, young. She was in her 40s. This was intentional. This was planned. This was a stunt in cooperation with civil rights activists to be disruptive, to make people uncomfortable, and to start a bus boycott that would hurt the pockets of the institutions that were actively oppressing her and her community.
It wasn't quite planned.
No, it absolutely was.
No, they had been doing demonstrations, but like this specific moment was not planned.
They knew they were going to do a sit-in on a bus.
Remember, like there was like Claudette Colvin and like other people. Like she was not initially intended to be the test case.
She wasn't. Yeah, she wasn't supposed to be the one that got all of the press.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be her.
She didn't do it first, but hers was the one that caught the attention of the news media.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, because like it was also. Actually, this is really ironic and interesting that we're having this conversation, because it was actually about respectability politics, because Claudette Colvin was darker skinned and she became a teen mother. And they didn't want that to be the face of the movement. Because why do you think Black people marched in suits and ties and their Sunday's best? Because of civility politics, because of respectability politics. The idea was to be the most respectable Negro possible, because this was still a time when Black people were trying to convince white people of their humanity.
Right.
In the hopes that that could be part of, you know, some type of moral drive to get white people to do the right thing. Now, because of our good sis Kimberly Crenshaw, we know this is about interest convergence.
This is also why Dr. Martin Luther King is held up as the icon of the civil rights movement, and his history is also very intentionally whitewashed as well.
Yeah, they demurified him too.
They truly did.
Did you know he was a hoe?
Did you know that might not be true?
No, that was true.
I just recently saw something that there is a somewhat backed evidentiary theory that the tapes that were sent to his wife that suggests that he was engaging in infidelity very easily could have been doctored by what the name?
The FBI.
Yeah, the FBI guy.
Hoover.
Yeah, J. Edgar Hoover.
I mean, even if they are doctored, he was still a hoe. So was Nelson Mandela. You know,
well, they are men.
People can't be
what
perfect.
Do you want?
And that's the thing. I think that's also part of the problem. You know, they have even respectability politicked him in that he's this good Southern pastor with a family. He is
a human man with failings.
No, but they literally uphold Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as there should be a reverend. It's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They put him out to be the traditional Renaissance man, perfect in every way, capable of doing every single thing.
Yeah.
Did you know that Samuel L. Jackson actually held his father in like hostage at Morehouse College?
What?
Yeah. Samuel L. Jackson is like a true revolutionary. He held Martin Luther King Sr. in like because they held the administration of Morehouse College in protest. And they like let him out like through a window on like a zip line. He was the only one they let go.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then Samuel L. Jackson was kicked out of school for a year. And then he went back and graduated from Morehouse.
All of this history getting whitewashed is white revisionism at its best. And truthfully, at the time, there was almost nothing about the civil rights movement that was considered civil. Numerous prominent white intellectuals, academics, politicians all said that this movement was radical, unacceptable, was widely uncivil. For example, Bobby Kennedy was famously asked to personally escort Black students into schools that were freshly being desegregated. He became, quote, increasingly annoyed and prickly and began lecturing them about the art of political compromise. Once again, it just goes to show that people in power view things that we now look at as absolutely reasonable and civil, like children being escorted into schools, as radical in the times where those acts are disrupting the status quo.
In reality, no form of protest at that time could have been considered civil because the idea of racial equity was outlandish to white society. Kind of like how it is now.
Yeah, I mean, to a lot of people, just the existence of a Black Lives Matter movement, whether they were protesting or simply just having a hashtag online, was patently offensive in a way that was unacceptable and uncivil, regardless of how they conducted themselves. We've made this point a few times, but I want to drive it home and make it clear what exactly we're talking about right now in this moment. When politicians in the Democratic Party make appeals to civility politics and they tell stories about this idealized past in which that was possible, this is a farce and it's a fairy tale. To the degree that civility politics ever worked and ever existed in the past, it's only because the voices that may have offended them were barred from participating at all.
To conclude this section, I'm going to read an excerpt from Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, and this will not be in an accent because it's serious. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. The moderate will always critique the activist methods because the activist disturbs their peace, the fairy tale in which the moderate lives.
In that context, there can never be a right time or a place for justice. It is always the process of seeking justice that rocks the boat. But that shouldn't stop us.
So, Cheyenne, what happens if we stay cucked with Chuck and stick to civility?
Engaging in civility politics will not stop the slow creep of fascism into our government. If anything, we're just opening the door a little bit wider.
Cheek spread. That's your little butthole winking.
The Trump administration is in power right now, not only in the White House, but they have agents of their agenda working across, obviously, the entire executive branch, the administration at large, and the House and the Senate. So we should not be surprised that they are making appeals to civility politics to quash all resistance to their agenda.
While throwing up Nazi salutes.
Exactly. They already have made appeals to civility politics to try to advance their agenda. Just think back to when Donald Trump had that second assassination attempt. He blamed it entirely on Democratic rhetoric when we all know that guy was basically just insane. The thing about that was the most surprising to me was that the mainstream media bought what Trump was selling. And they essentially also started to make calls for Democrats to tone down the rhetoric of calling Trump a threat to democracy, asking rhetorical questions like, has politics gotten too hot? The issue here is if Democrats accept this interpretation, it becomes the mainstream reality. They're making it true that by simply calling out Donald Trump for the lies that he blatantly projects, that is now uncivil. An alternative reading would be the way that Trump engages in politics has raised the stakes so high that violence has become more common. But that was not offered up because that would be an uncivil conversation to have. Here's another question that I'm sure you're thinking about at home, and many of us have been chewing on for a few months. Why is it that Democrats seem so weak to this idea of civility politics, and yet we can't seem to find a way to throw it back at Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who are patently offensive every single day? Well, that's exactly why, because you can't apply notions of civility to somebody who flaunts all standards of politeness, consideration. Elon Musk is the guy who just said empathy is a weakness. You think they are going to be susceptible to your interpretations of what's civil?
That's why Cheyenne should stop censoring me on this podcast, because just like the fascists, I am willing to say whatever needs to be said.
I think the issue is we disagree on need. There's a difference between a want and a need. Yeah. Factually, just watching Elon Musk try to speak to another human being, I find patently offensive. But apparently we can't talk about that either. We've tried. We have tried to label them as uncivil, and it doesn't stick because they are impervious to the label and their base doesn't care. We're going to talk a little bit about how they've managed to become Teflon, where nothing sticks to them and it just rolls off. For reasons Rachel is about to enlighten you on, fascism is mostly immune to civility politics. And before I hand it to her, I want to say fascism itself and using it as a label has been subject to this whole notion of Democrat civility politics debate in a way that I find so infuriating, because academics, political scholars, people who understand the historical definition of fascism, fascist, what that means, have rightfully applied the term to Donald Trump and his policies. And yet we have been told by the media, by establishment politicians, not to use the term, literally because they think calling someone a fascist is uncivil. Well, there's a fascist in the White House. It's just a fact. I'm sorry that the term is heavy. The reality is more than the heaviness of the term. And so I'm breaking with this weird institutional status quo of we're not calling him a fascist because he's a fascist. Rachel, tell us. Well, I have my crash out over here. I feel like a Muppet. I don't know how I got to this tone and tenor. It's really up here now.
Well, there's a new F word in town, ladies and gentlemen.
It would be so great if you just dropped a slur right there.
You know, like the Western. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there's a new F word in town.
Is that John Wayne?
Pew pew!
What is it?
Fascism.
Dun dun.
And all jokes aside, there's actually a definition. It doesn't just mean everything that I don't like. Just like white supremacist doesn't mean everything I just don't like. There's an actual definition that I'm meaning when I say that word. So what is fascism, you say? Fascism is a political ideology. And for those of you who don't know, a political ideology is the way that an individual or a movement believes that society and the government should be run. Fascist political ideology has a series of qualities that define it. One. Autocratic rule. All the power in one place. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, boys. 2. Militaristic culture. 3. Oppression of political opponents. 4. Belief in the existence of some kind of natural social hierarchy that should be enforced by the government. And 5. A willingness to use violence for political ends.
Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it?
Let's talk about the Trump administration. Let's back up these claims.
Please.
In terms of an autocratic rule, we see this in the way that there's now a concentration of power within the executive branch. Like we've been talking about all episode. Trump is trying to become a dictator. He said, you to the courts. Congress is bent over for him. We are not in a good place, ladies and gentlemen, okay? Number 2, the militaristic culture. President Trump is reestablishing the U.S. military as the strongest, most powerful fighting force in the world, according to the White House website.
Wait, reestablishing? Bruh, with how much money we spend on the military this whole time, you're trying to tell me that hasn't been true?
Well, yeah, I know, but that's the point that doesn't make sense.
They were spending all that money on woke.
Per the White House website, not only did Joe Biden spend money trying to turn frogs trans, but President Trump is reestablishing the U.S. military as the strongest, most powerful fighting force in the world. Did I mention he hates trans people? Let's go to the next one, which is oppression of political opponents.
Yep.
And because all 7 of the trans people in the United States are his political opponents, of course he has to attack them. He justifies this violence by relating back to the natural social hierarchy that he believes this country relies on. But don't forget, JD loves Usha, even if she's not white.
God, I love that reference. It's not even a joke. He literally said that.
I love my wife so much. Obviously, she's not a white person.
And with that, Trump is also willing to use violence for political ends. We see this with January 6th, with his deportation of people to concentration camps. And guys, we're only 60 days in. So I know we have some debate bros in the audience. And I just want to remind you that fascism is not debate club. You debate bros, the cucks, the chucks, and the rest of the Democratic Party insist that the correct response to the fascists encroaching on our government is to respond with civility and respectability, allowing the reason and righteousness of their ideas to turn the tide. Doesn't that just sound dumb? We know that's not going to happen. Because guess what? Fascists, just like white supremacists, are not operating in good faith.
You can't reason with someone that's not operating in good faith.
A fascist participates in the political discourse similar to a white nationalist to appeal to their audience's emotions, not logic, not reason, not truth, but emotion. Now, the less persnickety of folks may not notice this difference, but it's extremely important. Let's say, for instance, you and your friend are trying to convince Patty, your other friend, that dogs make better pets than cats. Now, you talk about how dogs are loyal, they're trainable, there's so many different kinds. Now, the person you're debating against knows a little secret, that Patty was attacked by a dog as a child. We're going to call the debate bro that we're debating against Chad. Quickly, Chad says, but all dogs are aggressive, bro. They're dangerous animals. 97% of all dogs bite a kid before the age of 7. Even though all that was bullshit, none of it matters. Because the fascist appeals to their emotions, to what feels right inside of them. Just like people can feel like the election was stolen. That's a feeling. What happened to facts over feelings? So by appealing to the emotions of their audience rather than fact or reason, fascists don't have to tell the truth. They don't even have to say something that feels entirely true. They just have to say something that is true enough and is the opposite of whatever the person you're told to distrust is saying.
So I know what you're thinking. Surely they can't just lie, right? Wrong. You'd think the media, the academics, surely they would just prove them wrong, right? No, it turns out that doesn't matter. And they've made sure to neutralize the power of anyone who seeks to respond with truth and fact.
Cheyenne, you're fake news. You're run by the DEI, woke, trans community trying to turn our frogs gay.
God, I hope so. You know what is really funny is I get people in my comments on TikTok all the time who say, whatever, you're a paid mouthpiece by the woke DEI, whatever. I wish. How do I get on the payroll of the woke DEI trans agenda? Like, if you are looking to pay woke DEI trans agenda, give me a call.
Yeah, big DEI. We will bend over for sponsorships.
Facts. An essential part of the fascist agenda is to undermine trust in public institutions that produce truth and fact. If undermining the media and academia sounds familiar to you, it's because Donald Trump has become incredibly adept at doing just that. From calling institutions woke, going after colleges for DEI, and radicalizing students to become trans lefties, all the way to calling everybody in the media fake news for reporting alternative facts. These are things that he has been doing and his supporters have been buying for years.
And clearly all of that information is faker than his press secretary's lips.
Damn. He's targeting Americans' fears about demographic changes and population changes, and they don't really care if it's true that kids are being turned trans in their public schools, or if it's true that colleges are indoctrinating everybody against white people. It feels right so they believe that it's the truth.
And now, back to the Nazis.
Rachel's right. For a historical example of how dark this can get, we're going to look at Nazi Germany. A downer, I know, but it is important.
This is the first time on this podcast that I get to talk about the other oppressed side of my genealogical makeup, the Jews. In 1920, Hitler and the Nazi Party began referring to Jewish leftists and even the foreign press as Lügenpresse, which means lying press.
That sounds so familiar, doesn't it? It's almost like someone took inspo from that. Lying press, fake news.
In 1933, when Hitler became chancellor, he appointed Joseph Goebbels to the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. This was how he started the Nazi control over the state media. Goebbels removed Jews and political opponents from positions of power within the government and staged book burnings to destroy Jewish and leftist authors. By 1934, it was effectively illegal for German media to criticize the Nazi Party. When the Democratic Party calls for civility in the face of fascism, what they're doing is bending over and sweating their cheeks.
What they're doing is bringing a pen to a gunfight.
Which is the equivalent of bending over. Debate only functions if both sides agree on the same basic set of facts. Remember the dog and cat debate from earlier? If I think that dog hair gives people cancer and you don't, then it's impossible for us to have a productive conversation.
This is a fundamental issue with trying to have conversations or debate about abortion.
Or anti-vaxxers and autism.
Exactly. Because if one side thinks something that cannot be verified whatsoever by any trial of science or fact, then you cannot have any kind of discussion where you will reach common ground because you are on two completely different dimensions.
Which is why Chuck, Cucks, and the Democratic Party are effectively following rules to a game that their opponent isn't even playing.
They've flipped the game board and we're still trying to read the rule book.
But while you're trying to read the rule book, time is running out. We're 60 days into democracy dying.
As we've covered, fascists eventually aim to eliminate every way that you could possibly challenge them, whether it's through the government, through the courts, through the media. And while we're not there yet, it is very clear that we're headed in that direction. Just take a look at the case study of Mahmoud Khalil. A graduate student at Columbia University, Khalil was a leader in the pro-Palestinian movement on campus, primarily serving as a surrogate and a mediator between the student activists and the university administration. Khalil was recently arrested by the Trump administration with plans to deport him, but there's one major problem with that. He's a green card holder, and he's committed no crimes. Khalil is still awaiting any kind of due process and ICE deportation hearing, something, in custody right now. And for quite a long period of time, Khalil couldn't be found, even by his own attorneys. The government essentially abducted and temporarily disappeared him.
Which what they're going to do again. So like when he disappears, just know he's been deported.
The only justification the administration has given thus far is that they believe that he is somehow associated with or aiding and abetting Hamas, but they have not provided any actual evidence to justify that claim. Given those facts, what is actually happening is that the Trump administration is attempting to deport a green card holder for exercising his First Amendment right to free speech because it is speech that they do not like. This should be setting off alarm bells for every free speech activist in America. The reason I think it's not is because they specifically chose somebody who is aligned with a cause that many people see as uncivil and divisive. Not a lot of people are aligned right now with student protests. They see them as anti-Semitic, and they have specifically picked this fight with a target that they can say is himself uncivil. And so standing by him would be as well. Notice that in the days following Khalil's deportation process being started, only 14 members of Congress signed on to the initial letter demanding that the Trump administration release him. 14.
Correct. Chuck Schumer wrote a letter about how much he didn't like him and everything he stood for. And then
true?
At the end, put a little caveat that says, but, you know, this is wrong. Really, I think this is actually a perfect contrast to people who care about America and people who don't. Because while Chuck Schumer is cucking away on his book tour, AOC and Bernie are literally having rallies trying to save democracy.
Yeah.
And he's cucking, shucking, and jiving.
Do you remember that Sark quote that we read you before in our episode when we were talking about Elon Musk's Nazi salute? I'm going to revisit a certain part of it now because it is incredibly relevant. They know that their remarks are frivolous, open to challenge, but they are amusing themselves, for it is their adversary who is obliged to use words responsibly, since he believes in words. They delight in acting in bad faith, since they seek not to persuade by sound argument, but to intimidate and disconcert. And if you press them too closely, they will abruptly fall silent, loftily indicating by some phrase that the time for argument is past. It's so eerily relevant right now.
Because every day, the Trump administration creeps closer to fascist governance. And the Democrats, the cucks and Chuck, sit there with their hands on their cheeks, spread wide,
Oh my God.
while talking about he can't do that.
You're not wrong. What I would say is that fascists place the burden of truth on their opponents. And for some reason, the Democrats are far too willing to carry that burden and do almost nothing in response. God forbid they rock the boat.
But guys, don't despair yet. Fascism hasn't totally won. Just kidding. We know I'm a fucking doomer. We're doomed.
We're not doomed. I'm not a doomer because
We're cooked.
we're not cooked. If you succumb to cookedism, I'm sorry, but then you are doing the same thing as Democrats. You're not resisting.
No. I can know that we're cooked. We've been cooked, and we will continue to be cooked for quite some time without
Giving up resistance.
Yeah. I can resist and know we're cooked.
I will not get cooked quietly.
Yeah, I will not be cooked quietly. That's right.
You're like a tea kettle. You'll just scream
Yeah,
the
I
whole
will
time you're
scream
boiled.
the whole time.
Oh my God.
So in his book, Against Civility, author Alex Zamalin coins a political orientation called civic radicalism. It's informed by the histories of prominent American anti-racist activists. Zamalin proposes that we reject the calls for civility, which only benefit the powerful and influential. Rather than following into the trap of incremental change and waiting your turn, bust wide open and cut the line.
Bust wide open.
Correct. Bust it wide open. Bust it wide. Okay.
We're getting slap happy here, guys. You can tell it's been a long day of shooting.
Rather than falling into the trap of incremental change and waiting your turn, cut the line. Imagine the community that you want to see and advocate for it directly. In civic radicalism, advocacy means participation. It means direct action, civil disobedience, organizing. Think deeply about where your efforts are going to be most effective. Whether that's racial justice, labor organizing, environmental activism. If you're white, put your body on the line anywhere because you're the people we're talking about. And remember, throughout American history, nonviolent progressive movements have been called uncivil. And Black and brown people have been putting their bodies on the line for generations. So it's your turn, motherfucker. Call your politicians and tell them to wake up. Speak truth to power. For too long, the Democratic Party has bent over with Cuck and Chuck and skated on requesting that the Republican Party behave. That's not going to happen. To end the deep dive, I want to leave you with a quote from civil rights activist James Baldwin. Majorities have nothing to do with numbers or with power, but with influence, with moral influence. And I want to suggest this, that the majority for which everyone is seeking, which must reassess and release us from our past and deal with the present and create standards worthy of what a man may be, this majority is you. No one else can do it. The world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it is when you came in. Because if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? Because we're already bent over. Spread wide for fascism.
And that's true on an individual level, but I also want to talk about what we should demand of the Democratic Party, because I also want to point to an example of what we've seen and what resistance can really look like in other places. If you look at what happened not too long ago in South Korea, the South Korean president also tried to take his own detour into fascism. He attempted to institute martial law. He locked the Korean legislature out of their building where they would go in and vote to overturn this martial law. And you know what they did? There's videos of these lawmakers walking up to the military members with guns pointed at them, blocking them from entering their building, and they wrestled the guns from their hands. They scaled the fences. They got in. They fought. They did their jobs. Do you know how different that is than the pictures that we have of literally like 60, 70 Democrats in Congress standing in front of the Treasury Department or one of the other departments that Doge has tried to go in and seize power in and take control of, and they're willing to be stopped by one guy, a private citizen hired by Elon Musk with a weird cartoon Band-Aid on his neck looking like he's on crack, and they're not willing to push that one guy out of the way to get in and do their jobs because they're elected members of Congress? It's crazy. You have to fight. You have a mandate to fight. When we're talking about they're going in to uproot Social Security, to literally dismantle USAID and leave people in other countries dying without essential aid, to dismantle the Department of Education, to leave kids across the country without food, without literacy, basic literacy, to institute their insane agenda. And we hand them a continuing resolution to keep the government open and do that for nothing in return? Hell no. You need to call your members of Congress and say, what the wake the up. We're talking about this is not the only way that they can play this game. I'm telling you, if you go look at those videos of these politicians in South Korea, you will be so inspired. And this is contemporary. We're not talking about the past. We're talking about right now. Fascism is also a global issue, and there are other ways that they can respond than acting like it's just not allowed. I don't know what to do. Something.
Well, clearly Cheyenne feels strongly about this. I think the Democrats are already bent over, so we need to slap out of the Republicans because those are the people in power.
Yeah, but we can't slap the out of them if our only force of power in the building is bent over.
So
we as individuals have to make them so uncomfortable that action becomes the only option.
Yeah, I guess I don't think that action is going to come from political operatives at this point. I think it's going to come from the people, specifically white people, being in the streets and putting their bodies on the line because everybody else is doing it and they don't care. And they're deporting people. And I think that it's a matter of time before they bring out the guns. And we see what Pinochet did in Chile in the United States. So that's my take. Maybe it's a little more bleak.
So to wrap this up, I just want to make the point one more time that failure to resist now just allows this system to become even more deeply entrenched, and it makes it more difficult to undo the damage that they will inevitably do now that they've got their hooks in. And if I see one more press conference outside of an agency that's being taken over by a bunch of 19-year-old tech bros and their poorly thought out AI bots, and you're not breaking down the door to get inside and do your job, I'm going to lose it. So that's the deep dive. And I know it was heavy, but now it's time for Rent Free. Rachel, what's been living in your head rent free this week?
This week on my Rent Free, I'm giving you guys a sip, a taste, a tease of a segment that's going to be coming to you this season. White Men Gone Wild. We all remember the nostalgic days where you would be on Spike or MTV and it was around 10:30 and your parents said you needed to go to bed.
Rachel, this might be one of those things where the Gen Z listeners have no idea what we're talking about. This is for the millennial segment of our audience only.
Under 24 has no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Whatever.
just a caveat.
Whatever.
So if you're young, younger
They
than
don't
us,
listen to us.
they might.
They don't.
If you're confused, just know that this happened.
So it was called Girls Gone Wild, and it was all these college girls, and they would flash their boobs, and it was like censored, and it was like, oh my God.
And it was horribly, horribly misogynistic.
Yes, but really, it needs to be white men gone wild because they're the ones that are completely out of control. So this week, what's been living in my head rent-free is this orange white man that has gone wild. Trump has renewed his attack on other old people.
I love that you say other too. Like, we need to remember that Trump is old. And if you need any proof of that, just look at him trying to sell sell Teslas in front of the White House, where he's sitting in the car and he goes, everything is computer.
Everything's computer.
Yes. And remember during COVID when he said we should just let them die out, natural selection?
Yeah, that was rough.
Well, now he and his good friends are trying to cut Social Security. The same thing that got Al Green up and yelling is what is going to take out a huge population of the elderly in our country. People lived on a fixed income. A fixed income means it doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. It's fixed.
And you rely on it.
Week to week, month to month. So what happens when our seniors can't afford their insulin and their frozen peas? They go into diabetic coma and die.
Well, don't worry, because the director of commerce said in a live television interview that if grandma doesn't get her Social Security check 1 month, she won't say anything about it. She'll think that there was just a mistake and she'll wait for her check the next month. And if she complains about it, she must be committing Social Security fraud. Tell me you've never met a working class person in your life.
Or an old person.
Facts. Or just like a person who's owed money. Like, you pay money into Social Security for your entire career. You are owed that money. You're trying to tell me if a check doesn't show up 1 month, you're not going to say anything about it? Delulu.
That's right. You heard it here. The Republican Party hates the poors and the olds. White men gone wild. Stay tuned.
Living in my head rent-free, actually, that I prepared for this podcast is the fact that Klarna has struck a deal with DoorDash. If you're not familiar with Klarna, when you go to check out from somewhere online and it gives you the option, instead of paying $100 right now, to basically take out a tiny loan and to pay $20 in 5 installments plus interest over the course of the next 5 months, that's Klarna. So what they've done is they're a company that has introduced debt on small purchases. And this is problematic, mostly because they are predatory toward low-income folks. And now you can finance your $20 salad from Sweetgreen. If you can't afford it in 1 installment, don't worry. You could pay it off in $4 installments plus interest and go into debt on your food, snacks, and groceries. I don't know what stage of capitalism this is, but it's gotta be one of the last ones, because this to me is so insane and it's so predatory. And Rachel, you'll like this because I know that you're the one that grew up with like the actual religious lore. I didn't literally at all, but as a poli-sci major, I got down this rabbit hole of how conservatives can be so deeply inconsistent between the biblical values and politics.
Are we talking about usury right now?
Yes. It is crazy to me how stoked conservatives and specifically conservative finance people are on debt and putting poor people in debt, when usury was like one of the highest sins, akin only to murder in the Bible. Usury, if you're not familiar with the term, means collecting interest on a debt. So giving money and expecting more things in return for having done so is one of the highest sins in the Bible. And yet we're stoked with that, but we will absolutely disown our gay son. So anyway, Klarna, buy now, pay later on your DoorDash order. That's been living in my head rent-free. And also Bad Bunny.
Yeah.
Well, this episode has been full of Hitler, fascists, and the fall of America. But it's also our first episode of season 2. We have loved being back with you guys, and we can't wait to see you soon. Bye, baddies.
Bye.